All right, my name is Adam Culp. I'm going to be talking about using Vagrant for virtualized development environments. My Twitter is @AdamCulp, and please, after I finish the talk, go out to Joined In. It says talk 8374 and rate the talk. I value any input anybody can give me into my talks because I do talk quite often. I like to talk. So I talk at a lot of different conferences and things, and I never know when I'm going to be giving this talk again, and it's always good to go back and look at the feedback that I receive so I can tweak it and make it a little bit better for the next crowd. So the people prior to you who witnessed this, last time I did this talk was about a year ago. However, I had to refresh the slides for a new version of Vagrant, but the user group in Florida appreciated it. I'm a PHP 5.3 certified developer. I work for Zen Technologies as a professional services consultant. So I go around to different companies that are clients of Zen, help them fix their code, fix bottlenecks, or help their teams get more organized, or whatever the case may be, whatever they need Zen to do. So if anybody needs help with their development or code or anything, give Zen a call. Maybe I'll be the one they send out. I'm the organizer of the South Florida PHP user group in Florida. We have about 420 members in South Florida. Doing pretty good. And I also organized last year the first Sunshine PHP Developer Conference, which is the first developer conference in Florida for about 6-7 years. So I decided it was about time we did that. And last year was the first one, and we're looking forward to having another good one next year. We had about 200 people total coming from around the nation, much like this, but it was only PHP, and we had a fun time. I'm a long-distance runner. For those of you, got any runners in here? Anybody a runner? Cool, cool. I say I'm a long-distance runner, but actually I'm an ultra-marathoner. So I run marathons for fun. I do ultra-marathons, are the real running thing, which is anywhere from 50 to 62 and 100 miles. I have done 100 miles. It does hurt. But it's fun. I enjoy it. And I'm also a judo black belt instructor in Florida. That's actually a picture of me running 100 miles. My wife ran with me for a short time. So what this talk is about is virtualized development. Is anybody using virtual machines for your development environments? Ah, very nice. How many of you are using Vagrant? Okay, we got a couple. You guys may know more than me, so bear with me on this. I'll do the best I can. I use Vagrant every day, but anyway. So if you guys see something I could do better, definitely let me know, and I appreciate that. So some of the shortfalls of development environments are that a lot of companies and a lot of developers, what they do is they try to keep their development environments on their local machine, right? How many people, even if you use virtualized development, how many of you still have a LAMP stack on your system, or whatever stack you happen to use, whether it's Ruby or .NET or what have you? The thing is we would ultimately like to do away with that, simply because you cannot possibly in your development environment mirror what is in testing or production, right? You can't mirror the same operating system, the same version of PHP or what have you, the same version of MySQL and everything. However, in a virtual environment, you can. You can say, I want this version of PHP. I want this version of MySQL. Bring it all together so that way it's exactly the same as my testing environment, which is exactly the same as our production environment. So that way, you do away with the works on my machine excuse. What do you mean? I can't duplicate your issue on my machine. It's working fine, or vice versa. So that's where having development environments can be a shortfall. It also, having local development environments like that also causes a larger ramp-up time when you hire a new developer. They have to get a development environment up and running. They have to get everything working together, and that can take some time. There might be a learning curve there because maybe the developer is not a DevOps person as well, or doesn't have any DevOps skills, so they don't know how to set up their development environment. You might have to work that in-house. So then there's Vagrant. Vagrant, what it does is it allows you to use an automated tool that behind the scenes is using some type of virtual software, whether it's VMware or VirtualBox, or Amazon and some others. And it will actually create a development environment, get it up and running for you in a virtual machine, so that way it can mirror your testing and your production systems. And you have full control of the entire environment. Eliminates the works on my machine excuse. And you can also use Puppet or Chef. How many people have heard of Puppet and Chef? Okay, good. So you can use either Puppet or Chef to do some more advanced settings, advanced setups. So you can really cater exactly how you want your development environment set up. Vagrant is not really intended to be used for production machines. It's only for development environments. So please don't try to use it for that. It won't work well. Use Puppet and Chef for that.
I was going to say, why won't it? If you're actually doing basic, spin up of...
You shouldn't, I would not recommend using a virtual machine of the same caliber you're going to be using for development as a production environment.
No, but I'm saying you change like the AWS type, for example. Like, is it inherently like buggy, or is it inherently just don't do it?
No, it's really just geared towards having
Okay.
a developer just Vagrant up and they're up and running.
Awesome. Okay.
Yeah. I don't know that you couldn't use it for that, but it's
Okay.
not really intended for
Okay.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I was just trying to figure out why. If it wasn't developed, that's fair
Yeah,
enough.
no, I don't have an answer for that. Maybe somebody else does. But I can't think of why not, other than the fact it just really wasn't intended for that. So some benefits of using Vagrant. As a solo developer, it maintains consistency across multiple projects, because with multiple projects, that means you would have multiple virtual machines. So you would have a virtual environment set up for each project you're working on. So that way, if you have one project that's running on PHP 3 or one project that's working on PHP 4, you have a different environment for either one. And so as you're editing that project, you fire up that virtual machine, and that settings runs that way. You can run multiple environments on a single host machine or a home machine, doing it that way. And it's also easily tear down and rebuild. So let's say you're on a virtual machine and you break something, who cares? Trash it. Vagrant destroy and Vagrant up, and you got a brand new one up and running again. It's just that simple to do. For teams, you can have identical development environments consistent across the team. So that way your team, when one person says, well, this isn't working for me, chances are the other people are going to test it and say, well, yeah, it's not working for me either, because it's pretty consistent across the scope. For companies, it's easier onboarding for new talent, and it's easy to build a development environment once, and then you distribute that same setup across the team. If you have larger teams, teams of 40 developers, you just share your Vagrant file and your other files across 40 developers, and guess what? They do Vagrant up, and they've got the same development environment as user number one. So it makes it easy to set up that way. Some minimum requirements of Vagrant. Vagrant out of the box supports VirtualBox, Oracle VirtualBox, so that's recommended. It does support other virtual machine and hypervisor setups, but VirtualBox is what it was built to support originally. Also uses Ruby, and the Vagrant file, which allows Vagrant to get all of its settings and everything, is actually Ruby. Vagrant itself, you need to install it. There's installers for Mac, Windows, and other various Linux distributions, or of course it's open source, so you can compile it from source and install it wherever you might want to. It talks to VirtualBox and builds virtual machines based on a base box. So I'm not going to go into detail on that now. I'll talk about that in a little bit. And you can also use Chef or Puppet. This requires separate installations of those applications. Puppet is a complete separate install. Chef, you can install it using either gems or as a separate install by itself too. There's a few different methods to install that. And each has their own requirements and so forth. And it also it enables setup and configuration of advanced services that you may need in your environment. Vagrant out of the box, you can have it provision some things. And you can even set up a shell script and have it call the shell script and do some setups. But for some more advanced things, it just makes sense to use Chef or Puppet to do it. That way you get a little bit more consistency and a little bit ease of use. How many people are familiar with Chef and Puppet? I think I asked that already, didn't I? And we got a good raise of hands, which is awesome. So Vagrant basic how-to. So Vagrant is a command line utility. There's not a UI for it. Using your command line, you navigate to the project. So let's say you have a web project and it's in a certain directory. You navigate using command line into that. You change the directory to there. And while you're in that directory, then you run all your Vagrant commands. To initially set up Vagrant, you're going to do Vagrant init. And what that'll do is it'll create a Vagrant file. The Vagrant file is a Ruby file, and so you basically specify all the settings in that file, and according to those settings is how Vagrant reacts whenever you run a Vagrant up. You can find base boxes at vagrantbox.es. There's a lot of boxes out there that other people have contributed. I have some boxes that I still have to do a pull request on. I actually just did an Ubuntu 13.04 base box, which is a base install of that. Nobody's done it yet. And I also have a base box created for Ubuntu 13.04 with Zen server and Zen framework all set up, ready to go. Actually, not Zen framework, because you're going to install Zen framework locally, and Vagrant's going to use it through the shared folders. But those are going to be up there pretty soon, as soon as I get around to doing the pull request. I've already created the boxes. So the two simple commands that you need in order to get Vagrant up and running quickly is Vagrant init and Vagrant up. Vagrant init is, like I said, it's going to initialize the directory. Now, what you can do is, in the newer version of Vagrant, you can actually tell it what to name the base box and where to find the base box. Now, a base box is a set configuration of the virtual machine that you're going to have. It's going to follow certain standards, like it's going to have a user named Vagrant with a password of Vagrant. It's going to have SSH capabilities straight from your host machine, where you do Vagrant SSH and it automatically logs in. You can do sudo commands without having to put in a password. There's certain benefits that come with using Vagrant to manage all that for you. Now, so running this command here is going to initialize the directory. It's going to create the Vagrant file, a base Vagrant file. It's going to download this base box, and in this case, I'm using Ubuntu Precise 64, and it's going to call it that within Vagrant. So here you can say, Vagrant's telling you, hey, I did it. Okay, I downloaded this, I put it in the directory, everything's created, it's ready to go. So then the following command you're going to run is Vagrant up. At the top of the screen you can see we got Vagrant up. It's just a simple command. After you do that, it's going to go through and initialize the virtual machine, get it up and running, turn on the ports, and get everything ready for you. And at that point you have a running virtual machine with the basic installation that you have set up and any other customizations that you put into the Vagrant file. And then you'll notice here it's also mounting a folder at /Vagrant on the machine, and that's going to be mapped to the directory that you're currently in on the host machine. Remember how I said you change directories to where your development environment is, or where your project is. So the VirtualBox or Vagrant is going to create an alias between this and your local directory. So if you're in /home/ aculp, my name, /site, then on the virtual machine, /Vagrant is going to show the files that are in that directory that I just said, in my home directory, right? And it's going to use them, it's going to map them there. Everybody got that?
Does that work?
That's something people have a difficult time with.
Does that work for other providers besides VirtualBox?
It does. They all do a shared folder setup that maps to your local. The idea behind VirtualBox is that your project files are local on your machine. So you actually edit them on your local machine. You're not editing them in the virtual machine. You can, but essentially you're still editing them. Even if you do it through the virtual machine, you SSH in and you edit the files in the virtual machine, it's still editing them on your local hard drive versus the virtual machine. So that's why I said earlier, if I set up an Ubuntu 13.04 that's running Zen Studio, or Zen Server rather, and it's also intended to have a Zen framework set up, but then you still have to locally install your Zen framework skeleton, so that way you have it, and then you go to that directory and do the Vagrant setup, and the /Vagrant on the virtual machine is going to map there, and it'll just run, as long as you have Apache set up right. So, everyone getting that so far? Okay, cool. So we ran Vagrant up. It went through everything. It has everything all set up and running. So we have some additional commands we can do too. So now let's say we didn't want to do the way that I did the init command, it actually pulled down the base box and created it on the local machine. Additionally, I could just add that Vagrant Bass Box manually and tell it in the command here. You can see I have Vagrant Box add, and then you tell it the name that you want it to be called and tell it the location of where the base box is you want to download. So a good example of that would be Vagrant Box add precise 32, and here's where to get it. So in your Vagrant installation, then it has that base box, and you can reuse it as much as you want. It doesn't have to download it again. It basically caches it in Vagrant, so it can reuse that base box anytime it wants to, and you don't have to worry about downloading it again from any place. Now this address doesn't have to be, as you can see, it doesn't have to be on vagrantbox.es. It can be on your local drive as well. You can download, maybe you created a base box of your own, or you downloaded one from somebody and you have it somewhere on your hard drive or your local network. You can address that right here. You don't have to use an HTTP address or anything like that. So what this does is it adds that base box into Vagrant so you can reuse it as many times as you want to. You can list your VirtualBox or your base boxes. So in this case, I'm doing Vagrant Box list, and it's showing that I have two base boxes installed. One is precise 32-bit, and the other one is precise 64-bit. Only because I know that that's Ubuntu, precise 32 and 64. Do I know that the versions they are? And it also tells you the provider. So in parentheses here it says VirtualBox. It's because those two were downloaded into Vagrant with the intent of them being in a VirtualBox provider. In older versions of Vagrant, you didn't have to supply the provider. It was pretty much just VirtualBox. In the new ones where you can use the other providers, that's what it refers to them as providers. So you could put in parentheses, it could be VMware or AWS or whatever the case may be. So some other commands you can also remove, and that's kind of the same as the add, but you're just typing remove. One of the things you need to make sure of in the version is you have to put in the provider. So you have to tell it, okay, precise 32, because you might have a precise 32 for VMware and one for VirtualBox. So you have to specify, I want the VirtualBox one, removed, or whatever the provider is that you actually have it installed for. And at that point, it just removes it. Now, if you already have some machines, some virtual machines up and running using that provider, or using that base box, they're still going to stay there until you actually destroy them. Even if you remove this base box, it's already created the VMs in whatever provider you're using. So the configuration files.
You got a question over here.
Sure, sorry.
Just to get into a little bit of the guts. So different providers have different ways of storing things in their disk formats. So does one box work on VirtualBox and not on VMware, or is it expected that they would work on either? Are there boxes that are tied to one?
Yes, they will be different. The base box itself that you download has to be set up for that provider.
Okay.
Yeah. Yes.
Where is the definition of what's in the base box? Are we gonna?
Each base box can be different. Yeah, each base box can be different. If you were to go out to vagrantbox.es and look, you'll see that there's a name of the base box, the address to download it, and there's usually also a description of here's what this base box is. Maybe it has a full LAMP stack. Maybe it's just a base install of the OS. So you want to make sure of what you're actually getting.
So it's just a virtual machine that's got a portable definition file around it or something like that? And what?
Kind of. It's actually in VirtualBox. I'm not sure if VMware, but in VirtualBox you basically export it out in a format, and then VirtualBox just creates a package or a zip file, if you will. So that base box is just a zip file of different settings and other exports straight from the VirtualBox, and then it reuses them again from that zip file. It's basically a gzip file or a tar file renamed as box.box. But so yeah, that's how it works. And so you want to be careful. I mean, well, not necessarily be careful. I mean, if you do a Vagrant up and it's not the virtual machine that you want, then you just download another box and try it again. But most of them are pretty well defined. Of here's what this VirtualBox or this base box is. VirtualBox, base box. I keep on getting them all messed up, right? So yeah, you just want to look at that. Most of the base boxes, though, they will carry with them certain criteria, and I'm going to cover those in a little bit and tell you what a standard base box should have as far as the settings and things. Now, what packages are installed on that box is a totally different matter. These are just criteria of here's a standard of how or things a base box should be able to have that are counted on. Otherwise, it's not a base box. Ultimately, if you wanted to create a base box that's strayed from the standard, you can do that. But please don't send it out publicly and make it publicly available. I mean, it's your private base box if it's not following the standards. The community will very quickly let you know you did something goofy. As with anything in open source, right? And that's a good thing. Okay, so the Vagrant File. The Vagrant File is a simple Ruby code that typically contains a Vagrant configuration box. It's the first thing loaded by Vagrant. So when you say Vagrant up, the first thing it's going to do is look at the Vagrant file and say, okay, what am I supposed to do? And it goes through that file and does it. The basic file creation is called from within the directory. So as I said before, make sure you're in your project directory of the files that you want to work in. And because that's where it's going to create that Vagrant file, and when you do Vagrant up, that's what's going to map on the shared folders and everything through there. And you can, of course, add more options in the configuration file. So a basic file would look like this. You would have your Vagrant configuration. You would have the name of the environment, or the base box to build off of, rather. That's the name that you named it on your machine when you added the base box. Now, alternatively, the way that I did the base box first, where I did Vagrant init, and I told it to load the box, and here's the URL to get it from, it's going to create this line for you and say, okay, this is where the base box should come from when I do a Vagrant up. If you already have the base box imported into your Vagrant installation, then this is going to be blank. But this is what it looks like based on the command that I used earlier. So this is just a basic file, and then you see here it's actually ending the Vagrant block in the Ruby file. Now once you do, confuse myself, I changed my slides. So once you do a Vagrant up and you have it up and running, you can also SSH directly into that virtual machine once it's up and running. And very simply, you just use Vagrant SSH. Vagrant at that point logs you in as the Vagrant user, and then you come to a command prompt all ready for you to do whatever you want to do on that virtual machine. So essentially, you're running from command line, just like being on any other server, but it's a virtual machine on your local. And of course, the project files are available at /Vagrant, like I said before. The virtual machine has read and write access to that shared file. So, like I said, if you wanted to log in through SSH on your virtual machine, you can essentially edit the files on your local machine that are mapped to /Vagrant there. And in the game root access, you can type su or sudo, either one. And a properly set up base box will not require you to put in a password for that. So that's one reason why, if you follow the standard, it wouldn't be meant for production, right? Because you don't want somebody just to do sudo or su on a production machine. So, but like I said, if you want your own setup, you can customize that. So port forwarding. On your host machine, let's say you're on your host machine, you have your VM running, you have your application edited, it's running on the virtual machine. However, how do you access it, right? If you're doing a web application, how do you access that? You point your browser to it, it's not going to know what the hell's going on because, you know, it's you running Apache or whatever. So what you can do is you can actually do port forwarding. So on your host machine, if you wanted to go to mysite.com and you expected it to point to the, or even the IP address, and you expected it to point to the virtual machine, you can add in a :4567 or whatever port you feel like putting here. And it'll forward that to port 80 on the virtual machine. So you can essentially test your application by using a browser on your host machine, and it's accessing the application through the virtual machine. So you know you're using it as a remote server right on your local environment, on the local host, and that's how you would do it. And then after you get done editing the configuration file, then you would do a Vagrant reload. It would reload Vagrant and make that active in the current install, or the current virtual machine. So some provisioning. I said you could use Vagrant to do some limited provisioning, and that's by including another shell script or something like that. If we were to add this line into our Vagrant configuration file, where we told it, do some extra provisioning using the shell, and in the path would be, in this case, I named it bootstrap.sh. It would run that as a shell. And anything that was inside that shell script, it would execute on the virtual machine. So let's say you wanted to, in the case of Ubuntu, you wanted to run an apt-get update, and then you install Apache 2, and then you tell it to remove the var www folder and then recreate it again so it links to the Vagrant file. So essentially your default website on Apache is now going to use /Vagrant as your site, which of course points to your local, right? So it makes it an easy way to get it up and running. And then we can go ahead and install PHP. Of course, I'm passing it the Y flag, so because whenever you install or you do apt-get, it's going to say, are you sure you want to install this? So that says yes. Go ahead and go through with the install. So you can use this to set up some basic configurations. Anything more advanced than you would do at a shell script, that's where Puppet or Chef come in. But you can do some pretty basic stuff like this. Yes?
So that happens after you create your box. And then
Yeah.
when somebody spins one up, it's gonna go do this after it's spun up? Or?
Yes. Well, it's going to go through this whenever you run Vagrant up, right? Now, if the let's say you've created a virtual machine, you've done Vagrant up before, you have the machine running, and rather than doing a Vagrant destroy at the end of your session, you say, you know what, I want to keep this, so let me just go ahead and do a halt, a Vagrant halt. It actually stops the virtual machine, gives it a graceful shutdown, so then the next time you do Vagrant up, it's not going to re-provision everything. It's not going to go through all the Vagrant file that it was supposed to do and everything, because it's already got a virtual machine, because it still exists in VirtualBox. Now, if at the end of your session you do a Vagrant destroy, and then when you come back you do Vagrant up, it has to start back from scratch. So then it's going to go through your Vagrant file and do the shell script as well. And the same thing if you have any Puppet or Chef scripts. It's going to run those as well to do everything you do to recreate it.
If at any point when it's doing this provisioning something fails, is it able to report what failed and why it failed?
Not very gracefully. For instance, I've had shell scripts where for some reason I mistyped something like PHP 5 install, or actually I'm on a Ubuntu box and I put, in here I put HTTPD instead of Apache 2. Well, there's not an HTTPD package in Ubuntu, it's Apache 2. HTTPD would be Red Hat, right? So that would fail. It's going to tell you that, but it's still going to get the box up and running. So you're going to have a running box without that installed. If you don't pay attention to what it outputs when you do the Vagrant up, you may end up with a box and you're assuming that everything is running and it might not be. There are some graceful ways to recover from that. Of course, usually I just Vagrant destroy, fix the error, Vagrant up, and I'm back up and running again. That's the magic of using Vagrant. And if you have a box that's not what you expect, you destroy it and re-up it, and you're set to go again. Everybody good so far? Awesome stuff, yeah. So exciting. Now, as I said, when you're done working with your virtual machine, you can use a few different commands to shut down for the moment. You can use suspend, which is the same as suspend in a laptop or anything else. However, it's going to save the current state of the running machine, which means you're going to use about another gigabyte of disk space, because it's going to save everything that's running right now. So that's good if you want that. If you just want to do a graceful shutdown, then you would use halt instead of suspend. And then, of course, you can use destroy. That wipes everything out. So then the next time you come back, if it's suspend, the last time, you're going to do a resume command. Otherwise, you're going to use Vagrant up and get back up and running that way. If you did a destroy and you do Vagrant up, remember, it's creating everything from scratch again.
If you do suspend in a Vagrant, what happens?
If you do suspend in Vagrant up, it'll just ignore you. Yeah. It'll be kind of lost. It'll say, I don't know what you want. So yeah, you definitely want to use resume. I believe in the new version of Vagrant, it actually tells you that this is a suspended box, or something along that line. I'm not sure. Generally, I do a destroy, because I want a brand new environment every single time. You know, now, and the thing is remember, even when you do a halt, you still have a virtual machine set up. You're still using disk space. Even though it's not running, you're still using disk space. In my development environments, I don't want that extra disk space taken up. You know, I don't want them taken up with a virtual machine that I might not use for, you know, as a freelancer and working with Zen as a consultant with many other customers. I might not see another customer for 6 months to a year. You know, if I've got them, you know, done with, I don't need that development environment anymore, so I'll destroy it. And then when I have to go back to one of my freelance jobs, or whenever I go back to a Zen customer, then I can just do a Vagrant up and get a development environment back up and running again. It wasn't taking up disk space during the 6 months that I didn't need it, right? So that's the strength of it. And the nice thing is when I do come back on the Vagrant side, when I do come back to it 6 months from now and I Vagrant up, it's going to be the exact same environment I had 6 months ago. You know, a lot of times using local development environments. How many times have you worked on a customer, and freelancers will know what I'm talking about more than others. You're working on a customer, you go away 6 months later and say, hey, can you add this? And you go to their site and sure enough, it doesn't boot anymore. You know, you go to where their site was locally and it just doesn't boot anymore. Because you've changed your environment somehow to satisfy another customer. Maybe you installed the new version of PHP and now the old version of PHP, you know, or application crashes, so it doesn't run. When you do a Vagrant up, you know that development environment is the same as it was 6 months ago because you told it what version of PHP to run. You told it what base box to use and things like that. So just some additional little features that turn out to be benefits. You can package your own base boxes. Generally, a lot of people, what they do is they'll start with an already created base box. Because there are plenty of base boxes out there already created that are just core operating systems. So you know that it's nice and clean. You don't have to go through the pains of making sure the user is correct and the public keys are correct for SSH and all the other sudo commands and all that aren't set up the way they should be. So somebody's already done that work. So reuse their base boxes if you can and if you trust it. And then create new setups to meet your needs. You know, maybe you don't want to use Chef or Puppet to provision. Maybe you want that box to be set up exactly this way without any provisioning every time I do a Vagrant up. You know, so you can do that. Excuse me. So you customize it, you get it up and running, and then you run the command Vagrant package and you tell it the package name. So it creates the package box in the same directory. You can distribute that, put it out on a shared drive somewhere and share it. And you know, if you are sharing it, you want to make sure you tell people this is what it is. To answer your question earlier, you know, let people know this is what I did to this base box. It's no longer that base box, right? And then so you would add it the same as anything else. You do the Vagrant box, add my box in the directory to the package, init the box, and then do Vagrant up, and you're up and running. So you can also package one from scratch. You know, let's say, like me, for instance, I recently created an Ubuntu 13.04. Ubuntu 13.04 was just released last week, so I wanted to have a base box running the newest and greatest, and there wasn't one out there, so I created it. So as we go through, some of the different settings that you want to do is you want to make sure that you set the size. Generally, base boxes are going to be 40 gigabytes, but it's expandable, right? You make it so it's not 40 gigabytes today, it's 40 gigabytes if you add enough files to make it 40 gigabytes in size. So that way the VirtualBox image is as small as it can be. And then generally you specify only 360 megabytes of RAM. Because out there on the internet today, some people are using some sort of slice management or cloud hosting. This is the smallest ones that you can generally find out there. You know, but you can make it bigger. You know, I've made some where I want them to be 512. If you're going to download my base box, you're going to get 512. You know, or 360. You always specify that. You're going to set the domain name and the host name of the machine, and to a certain standard. You're going to create the Vagrant user and the password, which is also Vagrant. You're going to create some additional groups. You're going to create a Vagrant group. You're going to create a Puppet group. In your thing, you're going to install Ruby, Ruby Gems, Puppet, Chef, SSH with public keys. The public keys are available on the Vagrant site. So that way, anybody coming to a Puppet installation will be able to function with those keys or make the boxes talk to each other. Now, if you're going to use it in-house and you want it to be secure, because this is not secure, this is a public key that anybody can download from Vagrant's site. If you want to make it secure from within your own company, generate your own public keys, your public and private, and add those instead of using the ones out on vagrant.com, or vagrantup.com rather. You set the sudo permissions, and then you create the /vagrant directory on the virtual machine. And that, in a nutshell, is really, this is how to configure a base box. And then once you package that base box, everybody can pretty much depend on this. You know, I mean, there's some other little fine settings in there, but this covers the basics of it. So anytime you download a base box, it should be this, if it's a publicly available base box. So provisioning. For some advanced things, we can use Chef or Puppet. We can create the script to alter the virtual machine. We can install apps, edit configuration files straight through the scripts. Many tasks needed to go from basebox to a desired environment can be done using Chef or Puppet. For Chef and Puppet, you have either recipes with Chef or manifests with Puppet. They're named a little differently. Manifests. You create a manifest subdirectory within the project. You know, of course, there's different standards. Everybody follows a little bit different standard. It's however you want to use Chef or Puppet. Generally, you're going to create a separate subdirectory called manifest. Vagrant's going to know I need to look in there. And then you have a default PP as the desired file to be loaded, and that's going to specify your Puppet settings in order for it to use. Some advanced capabilities. There's really a lot you can do. I mean, there's many advanced topics. You can use modules within the manifest, so you can have multiple modules configured straight through the different manifests. Again, manifest being the Puppet flavor. Create your own base boxes. Multi-VM environments, plugins, NFS shares, folders, and things like that. You can set all those in there. Now, Puppet is automation software. A lot of you are familiar with it, so you kind of know what it is. But Chef and Puppet both, it's software that allows you to automate the creation of environments. You know, so and they're used for production servers, development servers, testing servers, and everything. So that way you can kind of keep things the same. If you have a 1,000 server cluster, and you need all of them to be the same, you can set up Chef or Puppet to make sure that they're all the same. If you roll out something, if you upgrade something, you can set up Puppet or Chef to make sure that they're all the same. So that way you don't have differences in your environment and you have crashes and very bad things happen. It's just not good. You automate provisioning, and it's good for repetitive tasks. Even if it's not an advanced thing, it's just something that you want to make sure that you're able to repeat. It's a good thing to use tools like this, so that way you're doing it the same way every single time. You know, it's nice to be able to repeat things. If something goes wrong, you can repeat it and say, oh, well, there's where it screwed up, so I can fix it. Ensure stability through consistency. And there's in Puppet, in the case of Puppet, there's an open source version and a commercial version that comes with a little bit more support and things like that. The different components of Puppet, I'm not going to go into too much depth in Chef. I'm not that familiar with Chef, so I'm not going to cover it too much, but I'll cover Puppet because I kind of know some of it. So that you have the Puppet Master, which then uses the Puppet agent to pass information to the enterprise console if you're using the non-open source version. Otherwise, it's going to use the module tool, and then it's going to send things down to the Puppet. So actually the Puppet agent on the individual machines. There's the module tool, there's a compliance tool to make sure that everything's done correctly. There's mcollective, which collects the information to make sure everything's running. Factor, I'm not sure what it does. I forget what it does. Third-party products that are required for Puppet is Ruby, Apache HTTP Server, Fusion Passenger, ActiveMQ, and Ruby on Rails. Supported operating systems are Red Hat, of course CentOS, which is Red Hat, but the open source version, Ubuntu, Debian, Scientific Linux, Oracle Linux, SUSE, and Solaris, and Windows. Now the different setups, so you have modules and you have a compose. You create the modules that basically have a functionality, right? Whether it's a database server, web server, app server, what have you. It composes the application stack and then passes it down to the machines. So that way it dumps what it needs on the individual machines. And that's kind of the basis of how it works. The workflow is the node informs Puppet Master of its current status. The Puppet Master then compiles the catalog needed to make sure that that node is exactly what it should be if it needs to do some sort of correction. The node complies with the catalog and passes it down to the agent on the client, which then after making sure that everything's installed up and running, it passes it back to the Puppet Master in reports using your Puppet agent. And then the reports are collected so that way you can see, okay, here's what was done recently to make sure that your environments are all running. How that looks in a diagram is like this. You have the node, passes the facts down to the Puppet Master. Puppet Master hits the catalog, updates the node, and then reports are generated and put out to the user. Some sample usage would be roll out another node in a cluster, whether it's a web server, email server, database server, etc. Add more workstations. Maybe you have an environment where you have thousands of workstations across multiple employees, all around the world for that matter. Kind of linked into the same network. You can make sure that all of your workstations are the same. More of a DevOps rule than a developer rule, but you get the idea. You can also create life cycles in the machines from developer, testing, staging, and production, so that way you can make sure that they're maintained on an ongoing basis. The Puppet resource, in Puppet there are resources, and the way that they're set up is using this array-ish type language. It's not really an array. It's not really JSON. It's kind of something in between. But so you have in this case, a user resource. You give it a name, and then you tell it to ensure it's present, so that you want to make sure the user's there, and then you add the UID and then other settings to go along with it. And that's how the resources are defined within Puppet. And then you can tell Puppet to go through, with the commands, you can tell it to go ahead and check if it's there. You give it the input, and it's going to give the output and say, okay, here, this is created, this user is here. And it's going to give the output much like we just saw in the same structure. The manifests are where you can do it in bulk. So you can tell it Puppet apply my manifest, and because you can specify all this in a file using those array type of syntax. And so it's going to go through all those and make sure that it exists on the system. And then after it's done, it gives you the feedback saying, okay, it was done, here's what I created, or here's what existed. You can do classes, so you can do multiple things, within your manifest if you want to make sure things are done in a group. So in this case, we're creating the package NTP, we're making sure it's installed, and if it's not installed, install it with these preferences. So these are all within the class. There's lots of training available on the Puppet website, puppetlabs.com. They have tons of training videos. If you want to learn more about Puppet, I encourage you to go there. You'll know much more than I do about it. But the videos are pretty awesome. And there's other more advanced things out there too. So, one of the things you want to make sure is as you're using all these tools, it allows you to provision your way, whether it's to, VirtualBox or other third party, using VMware, you can use cloud or traditional hardware software. Some resources that I use, Vagrant Up is the site where you can download Vagrant, and there's also a tutorial there that kind of covers what I did here, but in a little bit more depth and detail. I encourage you, those of you who haven't used Vagrant, please go to that site. Just follow along. It's actually a pretty cool tutorial. It's pretty easy to follow through. Puppetlabs.com for Puppet, or the opscode.com/chef for the chef version. Chef is a little different than Puppet, but again, the end result is the same. It's just a different learning cycle to go through there. And then, of course, vagrantbox.org. That's all I have. So thanks, and please go out and rate the talk. If you have any questions, please, feel free. I'm on GitHub. I'm at Adam Culp on Twitter. And again, join in. Please rate the talk. Yes?
What's your favorite way to build a base box? What's the best
Define that
tool?
question a little more.
What's the best tool you use?
A base box.
Yeah.
I use VirtualBox for everything.
Okay.
Because there's an open version that is free. For most of what I do as a developer, I don't need to pay for an enterprise license of a virtual hypervisor. So I use VirtualBox for pretty much everything. I find that it's a little bit more functional than VMware for what I do. It does everything I need to do. Yes?
Suppose you destroy a VirtualBox and run a Vagrant app 6 months later, but 6 months before you have version 2.2.2, but 6 months later, this version is gone from the wrapper, and maybe current version is 2.2.4. So what happens if you run apt-get-y Apache 2?
So you're talking about the application. The application you're developing is now a newer version?
The package in the wrapper
Like
is
your
a newer
script
version.
is something that in your script that you run is now a different version than what it was.
Well, that wouldn't change, right? Now, your Vagrant version might change. But the stack that you built in that box is not going to change. Your base box doesn't change.
Well, for example, you do an apt-get in your,
Yeah,
at the beginning, won't that go fetch the newest version?
Yeah, but you would specify what version you want.
Okay.
You would specify what version you want apt to give you.
Okay.
Yeah, so in your base box, sorry.
If you care that much, make sure you
Yeah,
say what version.
well, remember, your base box is going to have a set, I'm not remembering the name. The repos.
If the customer's running the security updates, you should be on the same version that they're on. Otherwise, they have security issues.
And you can always specify out to the dot release if that's.
Well, what I'm looking for is if you have a base box set up for your development environment, and your development environment is going to use the package repositories of whatever that operating system was set up for, right? Your base box doesn't change. So if the base box is using the repositories at Ubuntu or Canonical or whatever, then it's going to be using those 6 months later when you come back. It's going to be using the same ones unless you upgraded those. Now, when you do the install with your script, you're going to specify what version of PHP, what version of Apache, and things like that. I was pretty loose with what I specified in this one, just for the example, is PHP 5. but you can specify, the version in your arguments as well.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Why wouldn't you build your base box with those installed already?
You can, and that route. I would recommend that you do that if you're not going to be sharing that box out. Generally, if you're going to be sharing that box out, then you're not going to specify that, because other people might want to do a different version, right? They don't want to have to go through the maintenance of doing that. But my base boxes that I use on my local development environments, I install everything, and then I create the base box. So that way, it's going to be the same forever. And I don't have to worry about doing a Vagrant up and all of a sudden I got a newer version, But you can specify a newer version if you want to do that, or specify you want to go to a certain version if you want to do that. I don't go quite that route.
Two questions.
Sure.
Does it support snapshotting at all? So snapshotting your VM if you want to make some changes and then roll back to whatever.
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay.
Now you can do a snapshot in virtual machine. And for instance, Vagrant VirtualBox. When you say Vagrant up, if you open up your VirtualBox UI, it'll be there. It'll be listed there.
Okay.
In your Vagrant file, you can actually specify what to call it as well. By default, it's going to give you a long string of numbers and all kinds of other crap in there that means nothing to me. But in the Vagrant file, you can specify, I want it called this. Generally, I call it by the customer name / and then I put a Vagrant or VAG on the end, so that way I know that was this was created by Vagrant, so I don't want to just fire it up in the VirtualBox interface. I want to fire it up by using Vagrant up.
Second question is, what about other providers, OpenStack, for example? Does it support it? If not, is it extensible?
On Vagrant upsite, they tell you what providers they support, and there's also a place where you can download other providers.
You can run DevStack inside Vagrant. DevStack is a special instance of OpenStack that uses software VMs. It's pretty perverse, but you can run a whole cloud of servers inside your Vagrant box.
Nice, thank you. Yes.
Have you, in cases like I don't use Vagrant, I'm looking toward getting a bit more into it, but how would you compare that to, like, if you want to package something, like create a clone in VirtualBox?
I do that sometimes too. If I have somebody who calls me for just a quick consultation or something, I have my base boxes that I just clone and just do something really quick. If I need a development environment though, where I need Apache to point to their files or in anything specific, I always do Vagrant because I'm going to need it later.
Right.
Guaranteed I'll need it later.
And does Vagrant take over, I think I've heard it takes over VirtualBox? Where
It does not take it over, it uses it in the back end.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's using VirtualBox as a tool, it doesn't take it over.
Okay.
It doesn't make any changes to VirtualBox. It's completely separate application. So don't be afraid of using it at all. I mean, it doesn't touch your VirtualBox other than telling VirtualBox, okay, create this virtual machine, create this shared folder, so that way this /Vagrant will point to it, and that's really all it does.
So something I had, I started playing with it a little bit, enough that I started off something inside today. I don't remember how it did the backend storage. So you grab the box from there and view and up.
Right.
Now, does it do like a clone of it? Is it like a copy on write, or does it make a complete copy of it, or?
What it does is it actually downloads the .box file and caches it locally.
Okay.
And then anytime you use that box, then it creates a copy of it, or actually it extracts it into the virtual machine. So it creates the virtual machine in VirtualBox and then extracts the file into it, so that way it has basically, it's creating a mirror of the drive, more or less, with whatever specifications are in that .box file, which is just a tar file in disguise.
So theoretically, it'll support Windows just fine if you wanted to register your own. If you decided to do it in Windows, a VM with VirtualBox, you could then register it with the add that box as Vagrant box. And when you do, just completely, basically subsidize all the scripts and startups, just Vagrant up and it would put it up.
I haven't, I mean, of course you can use Vagrant on Windows, but I don't know how it would work, because I haven't done it, as a Windows virtual machine. Because by default, it's going to create that /Vagrant. On Windows, what's the /Vagrant? You know,
Yeah.
it means C/Vagrant or something like that, right? So I don't know how it would handle that. That's a good question. I just haven't dealt with Windows.
What can we do?
Yeah, because it's using lib for the backend.
Yeah.
VirtualBox.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I've just never done it. I've never hosted on Windows. Yeah. Not since I knew what I was doing. So, although the new versions of Windows are pretty cool from what I hear. Server, but not me. Anybody else? Any questions? All right, thanks. Thank you very much.